All right, I think we got quite a few people on, so we can get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for attending. We canceled the asset valuation summit due to COVID, but had a couple of speakers that we thought would be interesting for you to hear, regardless whether it be in person or via Zoom. So our first presenter is going to be Dillon Kalkhurst, and he's going to talk about generational harmony. And we're going to make it pretty quick. You're not going to waste a lot of your time. We're going to go ahead and just kind of get right to it. We are going to take questions, but if you could save your questions for the end, there'll be a Q&A session, and he'll get all of your questions answered. So with that, thank you all again for attending. This will be recorded, so if you want to share it with anyone, you all know how to get a hold of me. It's Santora at Irontrax.com, or you can give me a call on my cell phone at 440-552-1369. With that, I'll turn it over to Dillon.
Thanks, Joe, and it's a pleasure to speak with you guys today. I was originally supposed to meet you all in Cleveland, as you probably heard before, but Zoom will have to do. So I'm just happy we were able to put this on. So as Joe mentioned, we're going to go through the presentation today, the workshop, and as you're going through the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to ask the Q&A down there in the bottom right. Click there and type your question in. Joe's going to kind of consolidate all those throughout the talk. And I'm thinking we're going to go 50 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little bit shorter. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and Q&A there at the end. So I am going to cut my camera off to minimize some of the bandwidth things so you don't have to look at my mug. I also want to apologize ahead of time for when the mailman comes, and my very aggressive pug, who does not like the mailman, is going to probably spend about 30 minutes going off behind me. So the joys of Zooming from home. So hopefully he'll be calm. I got all the blinds pulled and the ESPN cranking in the other room, so maybe I'll get him off of there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Stop the video. All right, great. So let me start by kind of introducing myself so you see what kind of why I'm here to talk to you about this. I've spent roughly 25 years engaging multi-generational families, predominantly in the K-12 school market. Currently, my biggest assignment and client right now is a company called MemberHub, which is a 100% virtual family engagement tool. As you can imagine, COVID has caused that company to accelerate by more than 400%. Because every single school's got to have virtual communications tools. So, fortunately, I was in the right place at the right time, and I've really been helping them, communicate with the different generations in the schools. Prior to that, I spent 10 years at Scholastic, and that's when I really developed a really love and passion for understanding the different generations, especially as it related to families. And specifically because Scholastic is, most of you guys probably know, they have the book fairs. If you haven't been to a book fair, you've either been there with your kids, grandkids, or been invited to go one with families and friends. But it's a very large organization that has over 1.25 million, mostly millennial, some Gen X parent volunteers. Scholastic is a 100-year-old company, not unlike a lot of the companies that I consult with. And it didn't take me long when they put me in charge of the volunteer engagement to realize that this, mainstay, great legacy brand company like Scholastic, 100 years old, was communicating, entirely different, in a different way to their core audience, which was millennial moms for the most part. They were still kind of communicating the way they did in the late 90s and early 2000s. So I really dove deep to kind of understand what's different about millennial families and Gen X families for that matter. And it kind of took me in a whole different route because I started looking at all the different generations, because in K-12 schools today, it's not uncommon to find 5 different generations of parents for a variety of different reasons. And there's no difference in most workplaces today. So you've got the millennial and Gen X parents. You've got a lot of baby boomer parents. and even some silent generation parents or grandparents who have been kind of brought back into the fold for a variety of different reasons. And of course, the students, Gen Z, 16 million of those as well. So in my time working there at Scholastic, I traveled the country and spoke at a variety of different education and family engagement conferences. And when I left Scholastic 5 years ago, I decided to kind of go out on my own and write a book about engaging the 5 different generations. And predominantly what I do is lunch and learns like you're experiencing today, keynotes, workshops back in the day before COVID. Hopefully I'll get back on stage soon enough. But really it's a bigger picture of a generational engagement strategy. That's my book over there on the left, and proud to say that every one of you guys attending today is going to get a complimentary e-copy of my book. We'll give you some instructions on how to download that at the end. So when you look at workplace environments for the most part, and you look at the different types of managerial people at a particular company, and then assess what the age stereotyping is. And there was a study here done on this graph by Achieve Global back in 2018, and they found, not surprisingly, that the C-level, the CEOs, the top of the food chain at most companies were the ones that had the most age stereotyping, predominantly because a lot of large companies or even small companies are run by older generations, boomers, and it's been all the rage to talk about what the hell's wrong with these millennials for the last 10 years. So not surprisingly, it really starts from the top. So I always say when I consult with companies that, it's got to be bought in from the very top. I'm not going to go in there and waste a lot of time trying to educate the millennials, because a lot of companies say, hey, I need you to come in and teach my millennials how to relate better with us. When I really say it's bigger than that, because I want people to really look, at the different ways that they can communicate with all the different generations, not just kind of focus on the millennials. Here's a list, my little brag sheet over the last 15 years of the different kinds of companies that I've done some consulting with around generational engagement and reaching families. So as you can see from this giant list here, there's not one industry out there that's not having, some sort of challenges with generational engagement. So when you go to Google, which I love to do, you go to Google, you type in something, you kind of see what is trending. If you type in managing millennials, and I just did this a couple of days ago, still 12.2 million results. And that's confusing. There's no shortage of authors and professional speakers, experts out there who will come in and teach you how to manage millennials. But if you flip the side, going backwards here. If you flip the side and then ask millennials how to understand baby boomers, they're trying to figure out how to understand the older generations as well, like their bosses or even their parents or grandparents. 7.3 million people searching for that. All right, here comes Gen Z. Already 216 million results. That's because Gen Z entered the workforce about 2 years ago. So just when companies figure out the millennials, or they think they got them all down pat, now here comes Gen Z. And rest assured, as you'll learn today, Gen Z is not baby millennials. So the whole concept of this workshop today is really to first talk about self-awareness. This is not going to be kind of a millennial bashing session, which so many of these workshops I've attended have turned into. It's really first understanding your own generation, becoming self-aware of why you kind of value different things. And then once you understand how you perceive different things in your own generation, then you can start looking at the generational stereotypes in your own generation, as well as the other 4 who may be working with you. And then start to dispel them. Yes, some of them are true for a variety of different reasons, but you need to at least appreciate where they're coming from, and then not try to look at other generations in a way that you looked at certain things when you were that age. So finally, when you go through this and when you have challenges at work, especially with with different generations, whether it's managing up or managing down, you need to ask yourself, is that person being difficult, or are they just different? So take that deep breath and pause and ask yourself, are they being difficult or are they just being different? Quick question. So today we're going to have this hour to really do a 30,000-foot dive, to really talk about, specifically the 4 generations that are most active in the economy today. And then you'll obviously have the chance through my book to take a much deeper dive after this, if you really found this helpful and interesting. So my goal today is hopefully to remind you of something you already know, and possibly teach you something new. And if I hit the home run and knock it out of the ballpark, I'm going to give you both today. So let's get rolling. So here's kind of our quagmire. This is the first time in history that 5 generations have been active in the economy. And the reason for that is, life expectancy now is in the mid 70s, at 78 here in the United States. Not that long ago, back in the early 1900s, life expectancy was, for upper 40s and 50 years old before the onset of penicillin. So back then, there really was only a couple of generations in the workforce. You had the newbies and the experienced ones. So if you look at who's in the economy right now, you got the greatest generation. Of course, there's 6 generations alive still today. We still have a few of the greatest generation around with us today. But for the most part, they're out of the workforce. So still 2% of the silent generation in the workforce. As you can see right there in the bottom, the millennials now represent the largest percentage of the workforce. Just this past year, they surpassed the Gen Xers. And rest assured, they won't be there long, because Gen Z, as I mentioned, is just getting out of college. They're going to start ramping up, especially as it relates to population and overall population. They're going to be, in a very short amount of time, the largest generation in the world. But basically, by the 2025, millennials are going to represent 75% of the working population. That's why so many of these organizations are focusing on understanding millennials. So we will take some time doing that today. So before we get into the different generations specifically, understand that generations are general. This is no science. I did not go to East Carolina University and study generational science. It's just, years and years of working with different generations, seeing several generations rise up through the K-12 education system, and just, becoming a student of it and really opening my minds to understanding how different generations react to different things. There'll always be outliers. Absolutely. I guarantee you, every one of you on this call understand or know an outlier. I always laugh about the guy you see on the commercials, the 94-year-old barefoot skier. You seen that guy, he's just whipping it out there. Obviously, this guy is an outlier. I would arguably say that my son is an outlier. He's he's got one more semester of college, but he never wanted to hang out and drink with his buddies in college. He had more fun hanging out with us. So he's an outlier. I consider him a Gen Z outlier, because he wants to hang out with adults more than he does kids his own age. So you might be a cusper. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, but that's a unique position, and I'm actually a cusper. I was born in 1965, and that was the magical year that some demographer said, okay, baby boomers are done. Let's move on to Gen X. Thanks for that very creative name. But because I was born right there on the transition between baby boomers and Gen Xers, I am a Gen X baby boomer cusper. And cusper parents tend to have cusper sons. It just works out that way. My son is a Gen Z millennial cusper. Now, there's pros and cons of being a cusper. One of the confusing things about being a cusper is you tend to have one foot in one generation and the other in another. And you'll always kind of identify yourself with one versus the other. I personally consider myself more of a Gen Xer than a baby boomer, but I have some baby boomer traits. My biggest example is the mobile phone. We remember the days when there was no mobile devices everywhere you go, 24/7, binging and chiming by your bed, constantly pulling you into work. There's not a day that doesn't go by. I just want to throw it out the window or just throw it in the ocean. But on the flip side, I understand that, hey, my whole life is in this phone now. My calendar, my workout routines, almost everything that I do is in there. So that's kind of an example of the push-pull when you got a cusper situation. The positive side about being a cusper is cuspers tend to be able to communicate more broadly with 2 generations. If you're born smack dab in the middle of a generation, typically you're not as good at communicating up or down. So Gen X baby boomer cuspers tend to be very good communicators, because, for the most part, we were around before the mobile devices kind of sucked us into texting and all those different ways of communicating. But you'll see in a lot of organizations that, folks in their 45 to 55-year-olds tend to be really good communicators and sometimes tend to be your best salespeople. So you might be a cusper leaning one way or the other. So as we go through this presentation and this workshop today, you may say, that's not me, because you may be an outlier, you might be a cusper. So I just wanted to set that straight before we move forward. So it all starts with effective communications. There's a lot of differences between the generations, but if I had to hone in on one, and this is why I start with it, it's all about the way that different generations communicate with each other. And as I go through this workshop today, obviously COVID-19 And basically the state of 2020 has changed a lot of things as it relates to communications and a lot of other things. I actually have a blog post that I wrote back in April when COVID started to take off that I'll share that link with you at the end of the presentation as well, that talks about specifically how COVID-19 has really, affected and changed the different generations. But I will pepper some of that in there today. But for the most part, when you look at the way that different generations communicate, let's start with the boomers. The baby boomers still enjoy that personal phone call. You see that phone there? That's actually hanging in my house. I moved into this little 1955 ranch over here at the beach in Florida, and there was this big hole in the wall where you used to mount the phone, right? And nobody has landlines anymore. I don't have one, but to find that, to patch that plaster hole in the wall was going to cost something like $400. So I go on eBay and I found that little bad boy for $9.50. So now I put it up there on the wall and it's art. And I love it when my son's friends come over. They're like, is that real? And they start playing with it. And when they find out it takes nearly, 45 seconds to dial a phone call, it's really funny to watch them interact. But the reason I got that up there is boomers still like that personal phone call. If you ever texted a boomer, my dad's famous for this. I text him and he immediately calls me back. I just need a quick yes or no. And I text him, he's like, hey, I saw you texted me, what you want? I'm like, read the text. I know, what you want? So they like that personal phone call. They do like email, but really, a lot of times you'll email a boomer and they're going to call you right back to get, more details because they like that one-on-one. When it comes to managing boomers, if you have a boomer on your sales team, they like to have a little bit more interaction on a one-on-one basis as opposed to a lot of electronic communications. Well, COVID kind of changed that. Facebook, the largest adopters of Facebook since April have been the boomers. They were already kind of moving that way and finding it very helpful to be able to communicate with their relatives and family members across the country. But the COVID-19 really ramped that up. And of course, here we are on Zoom. I am a Kiwanis member. Some of you guys may know who Kiwanis is. They're one of the largest service organizations in the world. And the average age of a Kiwanian is 66 years old. So you can imagine how our Zoom meetings went for the first couple of months. It's trying to get them to really understand Zoom. But, it took a while. But now we're finding that a lot of our boomers and silent generation members are really comfortable with Zoom. So, again, COVID has kind of shifted the dynamic. But when it's all said and done, and hopefully we get this virus under control at some point, I guarantee you that the boomers are going to go back to wanting to have those one-on-one communications. When you move over to Gen X, as I said, my generation, we were the first ones who really got used to using email. We were the ones that heard, you've got mail. Remember that? The AOL disc that you can get everywhere, and the first email you had. And I remember the first time I got a photo sent to me over the internet, and it loaded line by line. I was so excited about that. I think it took like 30 seconds for the picture to load. And, prior to COVID, I tell this story. I was flying in Southwest Airlines, and there was this young person behind me complaining to the flight attendant because, their internet was slow. Here we are zooming through the air at 300 or 600 miles an hour, 30,000 feet above the ground, and they're worried about their internet being slow. And it just makes me laugh when we think about the first time somebody sent us a picture through the internet and how much it's changed. But Gen Xers are masters of the email. If you know a good Gen Xer, if you're like myself, if you look to the left column of your email browser, you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of files, because we use email as our electronic file cabinet. It's not uncommon to go to a meeting with a bunch of Gen Xers and, you go through all these different things and it always ends the same way. Hey, send me an email about what we just talked about, because you want to put them in the file and you want to save it. Gen Xers do like texting. They will still take a phone call. They like Facebook, of course. LinkedIn is the new chamber of commerce for Gen X. And of course, Zoom is very popular with our generation as well. But when you look at Gen X and you start talking about email, the reason I'm putting these up there is you really have to look at the way you're communicating with different generations. Sometimes you got to send multiple communications. Sometimes you need to send a text and an email. Sometimes you need to post something on your company Facebook as well as sending an email to your customers. Because if you look at Gen X, I mentioned their master email people. If we were in person, I would have you all pull out your phones and we'd have a contest to see who has the most unopened email in their inbox. And this is the all-time high. This was at a state PTA show, and it was about 95% women who were running the PTA in Missouri. And sure enough, I found someone who had 132,671 unopened emails in their box. So chances are, if you're sending an email to this customer or an employee, they may not be reading it. So again, you have to think about the different ways that you communicate to the different generations, and sometimes send them in multiple ways. When we talk about millennials, I'm going to split them up into two: older millennials and younger millennials. The reason is not much changed, in communications throughout the boomers' formative years, or for Gen X for that matter. But when you look at millennials, a lot has changed in the 15 years since technology. So older millennials, those that are in their upper 30s, low 40s, #1 user of Facebook. The fastest growing users, I mentioned, are the boomers, but the ones that use it the most are the older millennials. They share everything, especially when you're looking at families. I have a client I'm working on, Reach Mobile, and they've got a partnership with Shutterfly, which does the digital photography, where they print on mugs and photos and all sorts of things like that. And they did a study and found that the average millennial mom has 11,000 photos in their phone. So they're sharing every single moment of their lives. So if you're reaching out to older millennial customers, or even for that matter, employees, understand that they're on Facebook, and they're not just using it to communicate, just random looking at cat videos. They're using it for business. They're using it to communicate. They're using it to stay connected with their network. They're also texting a lot. They're on Instagram, which most of you know is owned by Facebook. And Instagram is more of a visual, and that's where they share a lot of their photos. They're very active, especially millennial women, on Pinterest. And then Facebook Messenger obviously is very popular. They're growing on LinkedIn and getting better at developing their strong profiles, especially with so many of them out of work at this point in time. And of course, Zoom as well. When you're looking at the younger millennials, and I kind of lump them in with Gen Z, they get even more digital. I mean, isn't it interesting to see how it kind of goes, the more it goes to the right, the less people want to talk. So when you get to the younger millennials and Gen Z, they're all about texting. And, they will text you. I mean, I find myself texting my son. We're in this, tiny little 1,400 square foot house, and I'll be in the den and he's in his room, and I'm texting him, "Did you feed the dog?" I'm like, "Come on, I want to get over there and talk to him." But he'll respond to me, and I'll call him and he won't answer. It just goes to some robotic voicemail, but then I'll text him and he responds immediately. They're more comfortable doing that. So the three icons you see under the texting there, those are the most popular social media platforms that they're on, and they're using that to communicate. Obviously, Snapchat has become very popular, and one of the reasons Snapchat has become so popular versus Facebook for this generation is when you post something on Snapchat, once it's looked at, it disappears. So they think, me being the Gen X, which was famous for being skeptical, we have to think that those things have to go somewhere. But this generation believes that if they share something on Snapchat, it's not going to be permanent. And it's interesting too. You could tell if somebody's taking a picture for Instagram versus Snapchat. If it's Snapchat, they won't worry about their hair. It's in the moment. Somebody's going to look at it and it's going to go away. But if they're taking an Instagram picture, and I live close to Daytona Beach, spring break capital of the world, and I see this all the time. You'll see, it's mostly girls. I'll be down there by the waves, and they're taking the picture, 3 or 4 of them out there, trying to get that perfect picture. They'll all gather together and they'll look at it, and then they'll try again. They'll gather together and look at it because they've got to get that perfect Instagram-worthy picture, because once that goes on Instagram, it's there for good. So they're really focusing on that. TikTok's been in the news a lot lately, and that's really, garnering a lot of similar crave, like Snapchat with that Gen Z audience specifically. And of course, they're on Instagram, WhatsApp, FaceTime. The bottom 3 icons right there, this is really since COVID. This generation didn't spend a lot of time on Zoom video conferencing, but because of their education situation, whether they're still in K-12 schools or they're in college, they're getting very familiar with Microsoft Teams, Zoom, or Hangouts as a way to stay engaged in school. So, really, when you look at these different generations, this is the #1 thing you have to think about when you start communicating with them. If you have a broad audience, you might need to advertise. For example, if you're trying to get a message out about your services, you might need to do an email campaign, post on Facebook, post on LinkedIn, have a picture on Instagram, and even consider doing advertising on TikTok and Snapchat if you're trying to reach that younger audience. So this is my favorite slide of my whole entire presentation. And I have this sitting right on my wall because every time I'm talking to a client, and even my son for that matter, I like to remind myself how they like to communicate. So let's jump into the different generations now. And, you know, it's important to think, if you look through my book, I start every chapter with a look at what I call historical signposts. And historical signposts are things that happen in what I call the formative years of your development. Typically, you know, your teenage years into your early college days. Most of the things that happen, the historical events that happen during that time frame, tend to kind of shape your values for the rest of your life. And you can see here as an example of historical signposts as it relates to music. You know, you got the greatest generation all the way up to, you know, the different ways that we all kind of endured the music. You know, Gen X was all about the cassette tapes and the vinyl. I was a DJ. I still have 8 crates of vinyl 12-inch, you know, records that I have to keep air conditioned here in a storage shed. But now, you know, my entire music collection from my DJ days of 18,000 songs is in that little phone down there at the bottom, and I still got room for that. So what I do is I talk about the signpost, and you can kind of see as we go through this how the historical signposts kind of swing from one pendulum to the next, and they don't really stay simple right in the middle like we wish it could be. So let's look at the baby boomers' historical signposts. As you can see here, it was pretty, you know, pretty turbulent times. I mean, you had there was the assassinations, you had the civil rights movement, you had the Vietnam War going on. A lot of, you know, kind of when you step back now and compare 2020 to this, there's a lot of similarities on kind of what we're seeing now with the way that Gen Z and the younger millennials are kind of raising up. But baby boomers were really, during their formative years, they were the first one to really stand up and say, wait a minute, and start questioning things. Where the previous generation, the silent generation, you know, they were taught to kids were taught to be seen, not heard. They had the children's table at Thanksgiving. Everything was pretty much by the book. You'd go to work for a company after you got out of college, and you'd stay there until you got the gold watch and retired. But, you know, when everything started blowing up with the Vietnam War, and, you know, TV really drove a lot of this. And, you know, the baby boomers really started questioning things and saying, you know, is this right? They were the first generation to use first names at the office. So, you know, they were really the first kind of what we call generation to really shake up the norm. But because of these signposts, kind of what you see when millennials talk about baby boomers, you know, these are the common stereotypes that young people have for, you know, older Gen Xers and baby boomers. They tend to think that we're closed-minded, set in our ways, don't care about these younger generations, want to retire, spend our money, you know, and by the way, we have all the money, right? We destroyed the planet, you know, of course, lead inactive lives. We don't know anything about technology, and basically left a mess for younger generations to fix. Okay, so we're looking at stereotypes here. You know, there's some truth to some of these stereotypes, and some of them are kind of blown out. But you have to understand when you're talking to millennials that a lot of them have been, you know, kind of led to believe that a lot of the baby boomers and those older than 50, you know, kind of have these traits. And, you know, you kind of have to, you know, live through that and understand that, and understand kind of why they feel that way. But here's the truth, you know, and I see this in every single one of the generations. I want to talk about the stereotypes, but then I want to talk about the strengths, because the strengths are the most important thing that you need to endure. When you've got a multi-generational workforce, it's best that you understand the strengths and the weaknesses or the shortfalls of each, and be able to pair people together. And when everybody understands those shortfalls and those opportunities for development and those strengths, then you could do these reverse mentorship programs and all of that. So if you look at baby boomer strengths, if you're a young person looking at, you know, upwards, you'll see that they're very dedicated, very loyal. You know, they were used to working for one company for a long time, when today's generation is lucky to stay at a job more than 2 to 3 years. Very hardworking. They're workaholics. I mean, these were the ones that were first in the office, last to leave. And, you know, that becomes very difficult for a baby boomer to, you know, manage younger people today, because a lot of baby boomer managers that I consult with, you know, they're so used to the 9-to-5 workday that they find it difficult to believe that work ever gets done outside of 9 to 5. You know, when these young people could do, you know, all sorts of work just simply on their digital devices at 24/7, you know, all week. They don't really have to work during that 9 to 5 time frame. They're very competitive. They're team players. They're very goal oriented. And, you know, if you've got baby boomers in your organization and young people coming up through the ranks, they're wonderful teachers and great mentors. So those are the strengths of the baby boomers. And if you're younger and looking at this, you know, try to find those types of strengths when you talk to the baby boomers. So when we switch to Gen X, you can see that, you know, the signposts, everything kind of got a little bit more calm, right? This is my generation. You know, we had Reaganomics. Things kind of, you know, calmed down a little bit. The dot-com boom took off. We had MTV. You know, the first time ever we had rap music kind of becoming mainstream. I'll never forget my dad, the first time I played a Run DMC song. He's like, son, that's not singing, they're talking. You know, but it was really, you know, kind of a great historical signpost, the invention of hip hop and R&B, because they were using music to kind of tell the story of how they were, you know, living in their community. So hip hop came in our generation and really took off from there. And MTV had a lot to do with, you know, promoting that culture. Of course, there was the spring break. You know, here I am 10 miles north of Daytona, and I was down here when I was 18 years old. And, you know, that's kind of changed as well. But, you know, things were where the baby boomers had to do exercises in school to, you know, ward off a potential nuclear attack. You know, we actually got the chance as we were growing up in Gen X to watch the wall fall down. But really, if you look to the right, the thing that really controlled and really shaped Gen X the most was we were the first generation of divorce. You know, it was till death do you part kind of became a misnomer, especially when the women's lib movement from the baby boomers really excelled into the early 70s. You know, people stopped staying in marriages because, you know, it was the way that it was done for 100 years before that. So we were the latchkey kids. We were the ones who, you know, had both parents working. If they weren't divorced, they were both working. And we literally had 3 to 4 hours every afternoon to come home, run around the neighborhood, break stuff, and figure out how to fix it before mom or dad got home. So because of that, we became very independent. And if you have Gen Xers in your workforce, or, you know, communicate with them as customers, they tend to be the ones that you could kind of give goals to and get out of their way. So for the most part, if you look at the historical signposts of Gen X, you know, there wasn't a lot of challenge. It was kind of a work hard, play hard type upbringing. So if you look at the strengths of Gen X, you know, we are considered the forgotten generation. You've probably heard that before. And that's just simply because we're sandwiched between two of the largest generations in history. And we're the shortest living generation. We're only about 11 years, where most of the generations are 15. But if you look at Gen Xers, because Gen Xers were, you know, the latchkey kids, they tend to be self-starters, very creative. As I mentioned before, they're great communicators, good salespeople. They do adapt to change very well as well. So, you know, if you have a Gen Xers, they're like, yeah, okay. You know, I think that's one of the reasons why you rarely see Gen Xers get caught up in the whole generational wars that go on. It always seems to be, you know, the boomers against the millennials. Well, there's a whole generation in between them that just kind of puts their head down and just goes to work. You know, so a lot of people, especially my sister, who's a solid Gen Xer, she just says, we get blank done. You know, so Gen Xers, you know, unfortunately have been one of the biggest casualties of the COVID-19 layoffs. It was actually starting before COVID-19 as companies start to look to shave off expenses and find better ways and more efficient ways to do things. Unfortunately, they look at the you know, the salaries that are a little bit highest in the company, and they tend to be middle managers and Gen Xers. And so a lot of Gen Xers have been, you know, laid off in their late 40s, early 50s. Another thing that's driving that is the fact that the baby boomers, because of the recession in 2008, are not retiring at 65. They tend to stay a lot longer. You probably know some of those guys who are still in their mid 70s, you know, with the corner office. So a lot of those leadership positions, CEO positions, senior vice president positions that Gen Xers would typically roll into in their upper 40s and early 50s, you know, are not vacated yet. So you're finding a lot of companies are letting those people go. And that's why the number one generation for starting new businesses today is Gen Xers, believe it or not. And that was exactly me. I left Scholastic when I turned 50 and started my own marketing firm. So there's a lot of Gen Xers out there that have extremely valuable networks, and they've been in the workforce for a long time and know how to get stuff done, that are starting their own businesses. So, you know, if you have something to learn from this, if you are interviewing for salespeople specifically, or good communicators, you know, don't let those algorithm HR tools weed out, you know, someone who's in their upper 40s or lower 50s, because they could be some of the the most hardest working people that you could ever put into your organization. So, you know, I warn you about some of those algorithms that tend to, you know, look at, you know, more recent type experience, especially as it relates to technology, because these guys can learn. So keep that in mind as you're looking to build your team to not really overlook those Gen Xers. All right, so let's talk about kind of one of the things that happened with Gen X and millennials, and then we're going to get into a deep dive on millennials. When you look at one of the biggest things that changed in the formative years of Gen Xers and millennials, the biggest thing is, that I could think of is the onset of the 24/7 news cycle. You know, prior to that, you know, I remember coming home as a kid, the only time you saw there was news, that was basically from 6:30 to 7, right? You had local from 6 to 6:30 and national news from 6:30 to 7. And then there was Walter, all right? Walter Cronkite. You did not mess with Dad when Walter was on. He had his scotch, his cigar, and he watched Walter. Something happened at 9:30 in the morning, you didn't know about it until 6:30 that night. But then this 24/7 news channel came on, and I remember the first one was CNN. And I remember Walter Cronkite saying that Ted Turner was an idiot. Who the hell's going to watch news for 24 hours a day? And you know, to a degree, he was right, because for the first couple of years, CNN was failing miserable. They almost didn't make it until this event here on the right happened. That's baby Jessica. Those of you who are in your 40s and 50s, right, remember that? When baby Jessica fell into the well, CNN was there. And CNN covered that thing 24/7. And America was glued, the world was glued to CNN to find out what was going to happen to baby Jessica. And once that happened, you know, all bets were off. CNN took off like a landslide. And then, of course, now you've got Fox News and, you know, a million other 24/7 news channels that are just constantly pumping, you know, news, whether it's happening or not, 24/7. And that had a lot to do with the way that the Gen Xers and the millennials, and now even the Gen Zs today, are kind of finding out what's happening in the world. If you're curious of what happened to baby Jessica, there she is. She's living well down in Texas. So she did all right when she came out of there. So good for her. Let's talk about millennials. All right. Now you see that the pendulum kind of shifted again. You know, it was a little calm in Gen X, and now it's back to crazy stuff. Over here on the top left, the older millennials that remember 9/11, that changed their lives dramatically. It changed all of our lives. But when you look at the bottom right here, that's the helicopter parents. Helicopter parents, in many ways, were kind of created by 9/11. You know, 9/11 was transformative. You know, we saw these planes hit the buildings, and moms across America said, "Holy cow, I am not in control." You know, I cannot control that happening, but what I can control is what my kids are doing each and every day so I can keep them safe. And that had a lot to do with kind of the onset of kind of the complete opposite of the way Gen X was grown up, with a lot of free time, to parents kind of taking that pendulum a little bit too far to the other side and hovering over their kids to the point where they didn't really let them fail. And I think most of you on the call today would agree that failure is, you know, one of the best educators. So, you know, no fault of our own. I am a proud helicopter parent myself. I'll be the first to admit it. We were doing what we thought was best, and to many degrees it was. But, you know, what we're finding now as millennials get into the workforce is a lot of the opportunities they had to fail and learn when they were kids hasn't happened yet. So when they get challenged in their 20s and 30s in the workforce, it's a whole different response on how you need to respond to that and how they get through that. So you look at that picture there with the pelicans that are covered in oil. That was the Valdez oil tanker up in Alaska. And remember, we've got 24/7 news now. That video right there and that color image on, you know, the front page of the paper had a very strong impact on these kids as they were growing up. You know, had that been a black and white photo on page 5 of the newspaper, I don't know that it would have that kind of impact. But now these young generations, as they're growing up, they're starting to see what an environmental catastrophe actually looks like. And that has a lot to do with the fact that the younger generations seem to be a lot more in tune and a lot more in focus with environmental issues, and making sure that companies out there are doing what they can to keep the world clean and safe. And then on the right, you'll see that the foreclosures, the latter part of the millennial signpost, was when the recession came in 2008. And that really had a lot to do with the millennials, because many of them were getting out of college at the time and couldn't find jobs. They had massive college debt, and that was really a terrible time and a terrible experience for them to start their careers. And because of that, millennials tend to be a lot more focused on financing. They're not taking out credit cards like the Gen Xers and the baby boomers did. So, that had a lot to do with it as well. So we all have fun with millennial stereotypes. I'm sure, when we're in person, we always go around the room and there's no shortage of these. People like to say millennials are self-centered, narcissistic, entitled, lazy, unmotivated, disloyal, and industry killers. Yes, industry killers. If you go back to Google, which I like to do, and type in millennials are killing ... you'll find 2.23 million results of things that millennials have been blamed for killing. These are actual links to articles on the right. When you get this presentation, you'll be able to download it, and you'll see that there are literally articles all over the internet that are blaming the millennials for, crushing their industry, when in the real thing is it's really just technology and all sorts of things changing the way we do things. A good example is Toys R Us. The CEO of Toys R Us, when they shuttered their doors last year, single-handedly blamed the millennial generation for Toys R Us not being able to do their business anymore. They killed Geoffrey the giraffe. And in the memo, in the exit, the excuse, they said that millennials are waiting longer to have children. Thus, they're not buying toys as early. And that's true. They are waiting longer to have kids. But what I found interesting was that nowhere in that description of why they shut down and what the reasons were did they mention Amazon, Walmart, any of these online toy distributors on there. So, it seems to be over the last, 5 to 6 years that millennials have been a real scapegoat and, kind of blamed for everything. And really, it's just it's the world's changing. And, somebody's building a better mousetrap, and younger generations are quicker to pick that up. And because of that, certain companies aren't able to move, to change, to course correct. And unfortunately, they're the casualties of that. It's not because of the certain generation. It's because that that generation's moved on to, bigger and better ways to do things. So here's what I want you to understand about millennials. I told you this is not a bashing session for millennials. It's absolutely the opposite of that, because I truly believe that the millennial generation is one of the strongest, most passionate generations that we've ever seen in the U.S. And if they could be embraced and really, pull their strengths out, they'll be dynamic contributors to your workforce. So really, in a nutshell, this is what they're about. And I know a lot of you are saying, I haven't seen that, but you have to go in there with an open mind and look for their passion. You can't deny their passion. You've seen them with the protesting and the riots across the country. A lot of that starts with passion. Unfortunately, it goes to different directions, but passion drives a lot with this generation, whether it's social justice, whether it's the environment. A lot of that has been driven by their passion, the way they were brought up. They're very enthusiastic. Of course, they're digitally engaged. So if you have young people on your staff, definitely have them help you in your social media and your digital engagement with customers and also the community. Very social conscious. We'll talk more about that. Culturally relevant. They know what's going on, and they're in the know 24/7, and they're quick thinkers. So, look at that set of qualities right there. Who wouldn't want an employee like that? So I challenge you guys today, if you are having challenges with millennials, ask yourself, are they being difficult or are they just different? Because here's what's going on, guys. This was a study that was done a couple of years ago by Deloitte. 43% of millennials plan to quit their current job within 2 years. And when they asked them why, these were the top 3 answers: business and ethics, greed. They think that companies that stand more for the bottom line than they do for their employees, their diversity, their the way they treat the earth, that matters to them. Diversity and flexibility is a big deal. Lack of personal and professional development. A lot of this stuff is bubbled up in 2020, right? This slide was created a lot earlier than 2020, but you can see that, one of the things that these millennials, have had to go through, and one of the reasons they're so angry, is they've literally had a millennial career double whammy, guys. A lot of these guys, they came out of college, with crushing college debt, and it was right in the middle of the '08 recession. They couldn't find a job. They had to take jobs as a Starbucks barista with their, master's degree, and it was really hard to get things kicking. And then once they got in there and they got that behind them and they started climbing through the ranks, they're just starting to move into middle management and build their careers. Boom, COVID happens. And now they're sitting at home doing Zooms, if they're lucky enough to even have the job. And they're almost having to kind of restart once again. So, let's call it what it is. They have kind of, not by any fault of their own, just by timing, had some pretty, tough obstacles in their way. So when you talk about millennials, here's the part where I'm going to talk to the older customers or clients here on the phone. There was a study that was done by Buzz Marketing Group that asked millennials specifically about professional organizations, professional associations, like your chambers of commerce or, Kiwanis, Rotary, professional organizations. And the number one thing they say is it's old school. 37% says they don't see the value in the association. Like chambers of commerce, they don't get it. LinkedIn is the chamber of commerce now. Why do you need to join this chamber and have all these networking groups when you could just bang it out on your mobile phone? They think it was too expensive to join it. It's not a community comprised of their peers, and a lot of them feel that a lot of these programs lack technology. But if there's one thing that I could teach you about millennials today, understand this. Millennials want to start things, not join things. So I consult with Rotaries and Kiwanis clubs all the time, and they're always like, join the Kiwanis, join the Rotaries. I said, remove the word join from everywhere on your website. They don't want to join things, they want to start things. So when you've got young people in your organization, bring them in to, even if you've got an ongoing program that's kind of moving along, ask them what they think could be better about it. Bring them into the discovery process. Don't expect these young people to be hired and just plug them into something that's been going that way for the last 20 or 30 years. They've got a lot to contribute, and they want to be able to do that and not just jump on the bandwagon, if that makes sense. So do you speak their language? Here's just a few ideas of how you can kind of tweak some of your language. If you're talking about job descriptions, if you want to speak to a younger audience, talk about opportunities and the employee experience. They don't want to see a job, J-O-B description. They want to know how this experience is going to, provide them opportunities. Pitching flexibility and working from home as a perk. Okay, of course, COVID's changed this dramatically, but I've seen this in a lot of job descriptions. They say, that's a perk to work from home, but young people are like, why wouldn't we be able to work from home? Why does it matter where we get things done? You talk about annual performance reviews. Remember, this is the generation that was patted on the back every time they did something, whether it was good or not. They all got a trophy. They're constantly reinforced on what they did. So you can't just hand a millennial or a young person a job description and say, hey, check back in a year, I'll let you know how you did. Nope, you got to communicate with them on a pretty much a weekly basis. Give them regular, systems of feedback, contribute to them regularly. Still hold them accountable for sure, but don't expect them to go a whole year or even a month for that matter without, kind of level setting where they are and make sure they're, within the handrails and moving forward like you want them to be. A lot of old school talk is around self-starters and individual performance. That's Gen X talk, guys. They want to provide mentors, focus on collaborative teams. They like to work together in teams. They kind of did that going up through school. And, if you've got an older employee base and you're bringing in younger people, talk about the value of mentors and how they can learn from these people, because millennials will be the first to tell you that they are, that soft skills are one of their weakness. They'll be the first to admit that they're not very good at communications, face-to-face, handling conflict resolution, all these things that boomers and Gen Xers kind of learn, by design, because they didn't have all this technology getting in the way of that. They can learn a lot from that, and they appreciate that type of stuff. So when you're talking about recruiting millennials, definitely go mobile first. I shouldn't have to say this, but believe it or not, there's still websites that I go to with some of my clients where you open it up on a mobile phone and you have to pinch and zoom. That will make a young person cut you off immediately, and they'll tell you that this company is not technologically advanced. Keep it simple on your job application system. Please don't use one of those clunky systems where they have to cut and paste everything from their resume, and 30 minutes later they've done the whole thing. Make it really easy for them to apply to your jobs. Make sure you're getting good reviews, guys. I hope you know about Glassdoor. Glassdoor is a very interactive site where young people, pretty much all people, but very heavily used by young people, where they go in there and they review companies. So before they ever meet with you, before they even apply for your job, they know more about you than you think. They're going to look at what other people wrote about you when they worked there. People will talk about how you treated the employees, how you treat the environment. So make sure you're checking out Glassdoor and see how you're perceived on that. And if you have employees that love you, make sure they're going on there and putting some great reviews. Also have an active social presence and focus on company culture. Again, social presence is everything. They want company culture. And, let's talk about how that works. So here, and I'm going to fly through these because we're running a little long time, but you'll be able to get these 8 steps in the slides. So real quick, when you're building a millennial family workforce, I mentioned providing feedback often, leverage your technology, create that culture where innovation is the norm, not the exception. Offer competitive pay and clear advanced opportunities. They do want to know, and it's not uncommon to see millennials, wanting to rise faster than we did when we were going up through the corporate ladder. But as long as they know the steps of the ladder and what they need to do to get to those next steps, they will stay with you. Support flexible working hours and work from home. Obviously, COVID has made that a norm. There were so many companies out there that refused to do that, and now they're finding that, hey, God, we get more stuff done when they're working from home because, again, they're very savvy with technology and they get stuff done no matter where they are. The company culture is key. Don't be afraid to have fun. They like to work hard and they like to play hard and they like to have fun with their employees and their coworkers. Make sure your training programs are not just to help you. Think about personal development as well as professional development. So a lot of the challenges this generation has with mental health and things like that. So maybe think outside the box and provide things about soft skills trainings and things like that. And make sure you stand for something. Culture, social responsibility, and now diversity. Diversity has always been a hot button, but because of 2020 and COVID and the George Floyd and all that, diversity, as you know, is top of the list as well. So quick slides on corporate social responsibility. I mean, this is a no-brainer. You've probably seen these stats, but young employees expect your company to be giving. 86% of millennial employees expect them to provide opportunities to engage in the community. Even at work, don't think that, hey, go volunteer on a Saturday or a Sunday. Take a Friday off and take all the employees off into a food bank or something like that. Support local causes and issues that are important to them. And it really works. It's good ROI, guys, because these are actual stats from Edelman. Good purpose study. You can see that if you've got a well-designed corporate social responsibility program, it's going to boost your employee engagement. You're going to have less turnover. And ultimately, you're going to make more revenue. So, definitely research making sure that you've got good CR programs out there. And this is also from a consumer standpoint. The consumers that are looking to buy brands or work for your company or buy from your company, 47% of them will buy brands that support local causes, at least on a monthly basis. And that's up almost 50% since 2010. They'll also recommend a brand that's doing something that's supporting a good cause over those who don't. And they'll also switch brands. If it's a different brand of similar quality that they know is supporting a good cause, like their child's school or something like that, they'll switch in a hot second. So it's important that if you have good corporate social responsibility, that it's not just embedded with your employees, but it's also on your website and it's front and center. Here's some examples. This was in a hotel before I was allowed to not travel, but they had that right there at the Hampton Inn. See how this hotel saves lives. Cleantheworld.org, recycle. So, and I know you guys have seen this. If you pay attention, almost every big retailer or TV ad you see today has some sort of corporate social responsibility, social impact message. This is my favorite. You go into Starbucks, which pretty much every brand they sell has some sort of social impact connection. But, I love this. You're going to buy the Kind bar or you're going to buy the bar? This bar saves lives. I mean, they're going right at the social impact millennials, aren't they? But you can see that now that you know this, really look at the messaging and how these brands really promote what they're doing in the community. Subaru car company is one of the best examples. When you watch those ads, it's not about the car, it's about what you could do with the car and how you could help the environment, help the world. So quickly, we're going to wrap things up with iGen. iGen is the youngest of the generation. There is one coming up behind them called the Alpha generation, and they're under 10. But iGens are mostly in your high school and college right now. And as I've mentioned, they're just getting out of college now. But, they were really affected by the foreclosure as well, because as teens, as kids, they saw their parents lose their job. They saw, their friends might have lost their house or whatever. There's a lot of stuff that happened in 08 that kind of got this generation thinking, man, I don't want to be like this. So I'm going to make sure that I have my act together. I'm not going to take out credit cards. Matter of fact, 70% of Gen Z high school kids have indicated that they want to start their own business. They want to take control of their lives because they don't want to get themselves in the same position that they might have seen their families in back in the 08 crash. They've seen some crazy stuff in politics, guys. I mean, they saw the first African-American president who they all love dearly. Every time I mention his name at a Gen Z conference or teens conference, I get roaring applause. They also saw the current president as first the reality show star, and now the president. And of course, all this crazy 2020 politics stuff is going to be, something that's going to mold them. Prior to 2020, the biggest concern for high school kids was being shot at school. That's right. 74% of high school kids in the American Stress Survey that they do every year, 74% indicated that their number one fear was being shot at school. This went across all socioeconomic guidelines or schools. So imagine, how is a student supposed to learn in that environment? And now you got to throw in just this year. All right, those were the signposts before 2020. Now COVID, the Black Lives Matter movement, the politics of us versus them, the riots, all this stuff is being thrown at them in one single year. It's changing us all, guys. But this particular generation that's in their formative years right now, this is going to change them and shape them for life. So, still to come on how all this stuff pans out. But this has been a pretty dramatic year for this generation specifically. And because of that, it's really affecting, this was just some stats before 2020. And I guarantee you that these numbers are increasingly higher since everything has happened with 2020. This is the cover of Time magazine, November 7th, 2016. And if you guys remember that date, that was the week of the Clinton-Trump election in 2016. And they did not talk about Trump or Hillary. They talked about anxiety and depression in teens. So it's a big problem, guys. It was prior to this, and a lot of it's being driven by social media. But 50% of all lifetime cases of mental health start before age 14. And then once they get to that position, they're much more likely to drop out of high school. So it's a silent epidemic out there. So as these Gen Zers and also younger millennials, they're in the same boat. As they start to enter the workforce and they come to work for you, this is why it's important to have, some sort of, virtual, maybe you have a virtual mental health platform for them to take advantage of. But there's some things that you're going to want to look at offering employees these days that, probably didn't even hit the radar 10 or 15 years ago. And mental illness is going to be a big, big challenge for young people, and especially with 2020 and what it's done to kind of magnify that. When you look at smartphones and social media, I talked about that being kind of a big player. They're always comparing themselves to their friends. There's a thing called the 100 Club. If you have teens, you know what that is. That's when you post something on Instagram, and if you don't get 100 likes within about 20 minutes, you delete the post, because looking at the number of likes on a specific post is now the way that you determine popularity. So if you got a lot of posts in your feed that have less than 100 likes, then you're considered unpopular. As insane as that sounds for older generations, that's the new norm for these young people. So imagine that kind of pressure to kind of live up, to compete with everybody else's highlight reels, almost every day, 24/7. They're on their phone all day. They can't escape from it. Most of them sleep with their phones. You also pair that with the 24-hour news feeds and the fact that the majority of this generation is getting their news from social media. And 60%, in a recent survey, 60% they found of the news coming through social media was fake news. And the reason that it hasn't been addressed, in my opinion, is because it gets 7 times the engagement as real news. And these companies are in the business of engagement and keeping people attached to those devices. So unfortunately, fake news is going to be around for a long time. So the big challenge for this generation is to help them kind of sift through what's real and what's not. When you see these phones, the triggers and the sounds they make and the likes, there was a study done that showed that these types of sounds and these rewards are triggered in the brain, which is the same thing as winning money or eating chocolate. And I encourage you guys to watch this documentary if you haven't already. I just watched it last weekend, and it blew my mind. It's called The Social Dilemma, and it's a documentary on Netflix, and it was actually produced by high-level executives that were in Facebook and Instagram and Google in the early days, that have kind of seen, what the goal was when they started and where it's heading now. And if you watch this documentary, you'll see, how social media is really manipulating all of us, and more specifically is really targeting these young people out there by keeping them connected to those devices at all costs. So, it's not going to get any better, guys. So we have to do what we can to kind of help these young people navigate what's real and what's not. But with all that headwind, here they are. They're still the most entrepreneurial generation in history. You know, it's actually 70% now. I haven't updated the slide. That are looking to be entrepreneurs. They're focused more on privacy and safety. They're not sharing everything on Facebook like their mom and dad did. You know, now they're doing things like Snapchat. They're really paying more attention to, you know, the data that they're putting into these devices finally. And I think at some point there will be some sort of kind of pushback on that. As I mentioned, they're paying attention to their finances. Gen Z, there's more Gen Zers out there looking at financial planning than there are Gen Xers right now. Very interesting statistic because of 2008 and some of the things that they've seen that, you know, forces them to kind of get their finances in order a lot sooner than our generation did. They're the next great generation, guys, of employees. And, you know, believe it or not, Gen Z is going to represent 1 out of 3 humans on Earth by the end of this year. They're going to be 40% of the population of the Earth. So Gen Z is going to be a force to reckon with. Interestingly enough, they're trending to be more like their grandparents' silent generation. They're taking back their finances. They're kind of getting that waste not, want not, waste not mindset. They're focusing on kind of keeping to themselves. So it's interesting to kind of see them moving back towards kind of where their grandparents did. So in wrapping things up, I want you to become an intergenerational engagement maven. How you do that? You attend a session you did today, and after this, Joe's going to email you guys the link to download these presentation slides, and you know, hopefully you got something out of this. You'll be able to share this with your, you know, with your friends, relatives, cohorts, and workplace, because it's like I said, there's not a person, there's not an industry out there that can't benefit from, you know, knowing the knowledge of all the different generations in the workforce. I mentioned my book. Here's a little snapshot of it. You know, it's the history of all the generations. We take a deep dive in all 5 generations. I do talk a little bit about the silent generation as well. And really the second half of the book is how younger generations are changing everything, you know, from media, entertainment, education, food and beverage, you know, transportation, pet care. I'm actually working on a second book that's going to have 8 more categories. But 2020 has kind of changed everything. So I'm putting a hold on that because I don't know how that's going to turn out. But as I mentioned in the beginning, you're going to be able to download a complimentary e-copy of my book. It's a PDF that you can read on your devices or on your laptop or screen. And there's the link right there. Again, Joe will send that to you. And you just have to use the password Irontrax when you pull that up, and you'll be able to download that. And, you know, if you really like what you read, certainly go to Amazon and leave me a review. I'd love to hear what you thought of it. All right. So as we wrap things up, hopefully I reminded you of something you already know, taught you something new. And, you know, if we did our job here, you got both. So here's my social media. As I just talked about, you know, how we get all the kids off social media. Unfortunately, I have to stay on it to do my business. So if you want to follow me, I'm most active on LinkedIn. That's where I do a lot of my generational posting. I know Joe and the Irontrax gang follows me, and, you know, pretty much every couple of days I'm posting some really interesting articles on the generations. Joe's also going to share with you a link to a blog post that I wrote back in late April about the, you know, the COVID-19 and how it's changed the generations too, that you might find interesting as well. So with that, I'll flip it back over to Joe, and we'll see what kind of questions you have. Joe, you there? I think you're muted.
There we go. I was unmute. I had to unmute. Thank you very much. That was great. I received a number of text messages while this was going on from people that were watching, and they said the information was really good and really informative. I very much appreciate it. If anybody's got any questions, now is the time to ask. So we'll open it up for Q&A if anyone has any questions. Go ahead, and I think you type in here, right? Yeah. Just type in the question.
If a question pops up later, which it will, you'll be at home talking to your spouse about what you heard today. Yeah. And if something pops up, there's my email down there, guys. Dillon.
We do have a question. It says, what do you see as being the biggest issue in the future workforce for people that are kids today?
With the kids, I think, like I'd mentioned, I think the biggest challenge they're going to have is the mental health issue. You know, a recent study that was done, again, before COVID, was that 85% of young people today suffer from some sort of mild or moderate depression. And And again, that all spiked in 2012 when the majority of teens got mobile devices and social media. So I think that, companies are going to have to really pay attention to that and focus a lot on providing, that kind of mental health, benefits in addition to the, the regular physical medical benefits that they've done for decades, and really focus on kind of, creating a well-rounded person. Also from, what I'm hearing right now, especially from Gen Zers that are coming out of college, 24, 25-year-olds, is their soft skills are less developed than the millennials. So, really looking into your corporate training and professional development programming to make sure you have soft skills training. Again, conflict resolution, communications, and, remember, if you have Gen Xers and Boomers in your organization, nobody makes a better mentor for soft skills than your older employees that are already there.
Excellent, thank you. It looks like that's it. We don't have any more questions. So only one question.
Awesome.
Yeah, if anybody else has any others, now's the time. But I do have Dillon's information and his links to the book. We will be getting that information out to you shortly. In the meantime, if you have any questions, you can reach out to myself, or you have Dillon's information, anything that we can do. I hope this was helpful. Oh, hold on a second. Looks like we have another question. Let's see here. So it says, I'm a cusper, last boomer, and understand what you said about 1 foot in both. Any suggestions on coaching a stubborn boomer who is unwilling to change or adapt?
That's a funny question, because you're going to find the ones who refuse. And I find this most with boomer sales managers, specifically in the advertising world. A lot of boomer sales managers run like TV and broadcast advertising, and the media is one of my biggest clients. And they get so frustrated when the young people come in, they just refuse, to kind of adapt to the way they were. They want them. It's just, I guess, the first thing you could do is get them to read the book, to really understand where these millennials are coming from. And I have, believe me, I had one of the perfect quintessential boomer sales managers when I was at Scholastic. And this was the guy, who expected his flock to be there, in the office, 9 o'clock in the cube, do not leave before 5, because to that type of sales manager who's grown up in that environment, if he doesn't see the people out there, then they must not be working. They must be at home mowing the lawn, when that's not the case at all, especially with millennials. It's not uncommon to see a millennial mom, for example, have to take their child to school or the doctor's office, come into work at 10. Maybe they have to leave at 3:30, pick them up, take them to soccer practice, take them home, bathe them, feed them, read them a story. Boom, they're back on email at 10 o'clock, and they'll work till midnight, and they get stuff done. So it's not so much about, the hours and making, because millennials don't judge productivity by hours worked. They judge it by, the effectiveness of what they had to get done. So it's kind of taking that step back. But again, a lot of those, I've run into a lot of baby boomer managers that are stuck in their ways. They think everybody that's below 50 are idiots. And you're going to have, I call them outliers, because you're going to have some of those. But if anything, maybe you could share this webinar with them over lunch. And, feel free to forward them the link to my book, ebook, and see if that steers them.
Cool, thank you very much. I do not see any other questions. Let me just double check one more time, because one of them came up on chat, one of them came up on our questions. No, I think we're good. Thank you very, very much for doing this. This was wonderful.
Enjoyed it. I hope it helped, guys. Again, if questions come up down the road, feel free to email me or Joe.
Hold on, I guess we got another one coming in. Hold on. How would you go about pulling the millennials away from the participation trophy mentality? There are a large number of younger people in my profession that feel that they are entitled to everything.
Yeah, that is it's a big stereotype, but again, it's not their fault. It's the way that we raise them. Gen X was raised. I remember my dad specifically telling me when we came back from a basketball tournament, said, when we got second place, he said, second place is last, son. So we were trained to win at all costs, and again, the whole self-esteem movement of the late 70s and then the helicopter parenting, we kind of created this demon that we had. And so, the entitlement is really mapping out specifically what it takes to get to the next level. I know a lot of companies that I consult with, they're not very clear on specifically kind of the roadmap to, because every millennial starts and they want to know, how can I be CEO in 6 years? 6 months. They want to just go from here to here because they were conditioned their whole life to see like LeBron James. They see LeBron James making $50 million a year, putting the basket, putting the ball in the hoop. What they don't see is the millions and millions and millions of hours that he spent as a teenager, shooting free throws until 3 in the morning. They see these, rap, all their celebrities on TV and all that. They don't understand the hard work it took to get there. And again, that's kind of how they see that. So it's kind of hard to bring them back into perspective and say, here's the map. And in order to get to here, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And sometimes it takes, back in the day, there could be like 3 levels of management. I've seen a lot of companies now that will actually break that into 9 levels of management, as long as they feel like they're stepping up. And it's not about money with this generation either. They would rather, it's all about title and responsibility. Of course, they can make money as they go up too, but that's not what really drives them. It's about, responsibility, learning more. So, it's hard. Again, just like I said about the baby boomer example, there will be some millennials out there that you can't change either. That just have that entitlement personality. And that doesn't go for just millennials. That could be in any generation. But, I think it has to do with a lot of roadmaps and specific steps on where to get and what it takes to get to that next step that can help with that.
Got it. One other question that I saw popped up had to do with the generational differences and the respect for authority figures. And how do you see that? I guess the question is, how do you see that coming about? Where I guess the question was, where did we lose our way?
Yeah, in 2020 has got a lot to do with this whole, I don't want to get political or anything, but it's infuriating me to see how young people treat the police specifically, and that's being pushed in our face almost every day. And baby boomers, Gen Xers, most of us were brought up to respect authority. My dad always told me, I don't care what the cop's done. If he asks you to do something, you do it. And I think that the media is really portraying opportunities to defy that. And I don't know, that's a very tough question, but it should transcend the workforce. And it has a lot to do with trust. Millennials don't want to work for a boss. They want to work for, a mentor, a coach. So it's building that trust with that older, employee as they come in, to know that that person is going to help them get to where they need to be in their career and in life, personally and professionally. And it has to do with the trust. It's not going to, again, it's very difficult when they're being pounded with all these images on social media and the 24/7 news, and then they come in here and the whole okay boomer thing, that they kicked up in the beginning. When COVID first started, it was a generational war. They literally called the COVID-19 the boomer remover. Because at first, remember, only the old people got it. And they're like, hey, we don't care. They were down at spring break in Daytona partying, and we don't care. Now all of a sudden they get it, So, it's just, it is very frustrating to me. And I don't know what's happened. It's probably, if you watch that documentary, you'll probably say it was social media. But we're divided on everything now, So, we find anything to do that's one way or the other. It's almost like we like division, So it's difficult. Difficult question.
Okay. No, that was good. Those were great questions, and I don't see any others at this point. So I think we're good. I think we'll wrap it up. I can't thank you enough for doing this. The information was great. I know it helps me, as an employer of people, and it helps me as a customer getting to understand the people that that are hiring us to do our work. Some of them are younger than me. Some of them are older, and they all have different hot points. And they definitely see the difference in the communication mediums. I'm almost always put off by initial contact if someone texts me first, because I like a phone call, but I find, and you illustrated that it's pretty common for a younger generation than mine, right? I'm 47, so they don't think anything of it.
Yeah, I mean, I got a whole section on dating, the way these young people date. You know, first of all, they find their mate on an app, and they'll break up on them by text. And I mean, some of these people will have relationships. They'll have relationships for 6 months before they ever meet the people. You know, it's just comfortable with that. It's the way they were brought up.
Absolutely.
They're not difficult. They're just different.
That's it. Nobody picks up their wife in the shopping market anymore.
No,
There's no shopping malls to hang out at, so you're done there.
that's right.
Well, thank you very much. Like I said, no other questions have come in, and I know everybody's got a busy day, but we really appreciate it, and we look forward to chatting with you soon.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
Take care. Thanks.